Hallo? Ja, jeg tror, det virker nu. Jeg vil bare på bibliotekets vegne sige velkommen til jer alle sammen, og velkommen til Dina, som vil holde det her oplæg for os omkring hendes masteropgave. Det her det er et led i flere forskellige studerende, som vil komme og præsentere deres masteropgave for os og fortælle, hvad de laver. Og det er jo utroligt spændende, at vi kan få lov til at høre, hvad der foregår ude på universitetet eller ude i krogene her. Så jeg vil bare byde dig velkommen, og så får du ordet, og så glæder vi os til at høre det.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the kind words, and I'm not sure how this is going to go. I'm very excited. So thank you all for coming. And most of all, I am just at the beginning of my research. This is the result of the past summers digging through the topic and my personal interest. And the main work is yet to come. So I'm doing the presentation for very selfish reasons, maybe, to get a lot of feedback and to get help from the library. And my supervisor is not here, so that's a good thing. No. Waiting for Godot in Sarajevo. First of all, I come from Sarajevo, from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I spent the entire wartime there. So that's my personal relationship to both the place and the topic. And Susan Sontag has directed this play in 1993. That was her second visit to Sarajevo, in fact. She came there and then she decided to come back because she felt there is a difference between acknowledging the suffering of the people and taking actual part in the turmoil, protesting against the war. And her way to do so was not to just sit and hunger with people and listen to their tragic stories, but to set up a play, because this is the only thing that she knew how to do. She wrote and she produced plays. So the Bosnian War is the greatest European catastrophe since the Second World War. It is not as distant as the Second World War. So for us, it is a recent experience. It is fresh. It is so sometimes easy to talk about the Second World War and to have so many research about Holocaust, almost. I'm aware that I'm not saying easy here as a bagatelle, but it is further. People usually refer to it as something which was in the past, and this is in such a recent history, so it's very difficult to talk to people. They are still alive, these victims are still there, and their experience is still fresh, so they don't know how to open up and re-enter the narrative after the war. So this was one of the questions that I wanted to pose and to explore during my research, because I also feel like a bad victim. I feel stupid when I talk about the war. I talk about it with this silly smile on my face, like I'm talking about something normal. So these more than 3 years of such experience were normality for me, while as people were performing this normality every day of their lives. So I'm expecting to find out the aspects of the play which were invisible until it was produced in this socio-historic locale. I think that it's going to be also important to see what this has done to the play. How do we look at Waiting for Godot now from this new angle, in this new context? The war in Bosnia was stopped by an international intervention, mainly American. The Dayton Agreement was signed in 1995, and the country was split in two. Serbian ultranationalists, which we call Chetniks, invented the term ethnic cleansing. The war lasted for more than 3 years, and the capital was besieged for 1,425 days. There was no electricity, no food, no water, and yet under these incomprehensible circumstances, Susan Sontag chose to come there to direct and produce this play. Also, why Godot And why the Bosnian War? Because it's such a whole critical industry which is thriving around Beckett as a figure and this performance as such. And again, shelves are bending under the amount of literature which is written about the Bosnian War. But as I said, since it is still recent and fresh, people are not looking, especially in memory studies, people are not looking at this from this perspective. Memory studies usually include social sciences, history. It is still a multidisciplinary field. And literature is another way to look into things, to experience things. And this was one of the ways for Sarajevans, for the people of Sarajevo, to give their cultural resistance. This also served for them to restore their dignity during this suffering and humiliation. The relationship between the play and the actual situation in the city is both thematic and symbolic. The waiting is dark, is humorous, it's endless. And since the citizens could not physically protect themselves from the everyday shelling and sudden death from a lurking sniper, they tried to increase and optimize the functionality and productivity of everyday life. They worked themselves into conscious forgetting. It's different from ignoring, I think, because it requires strenuous effort and repression. And constantly, the life under the siege seemed like a performance. And this is one of the connections that I want to show also between the Waiting for Godot, which was set on stage, and the actual life that people were living and performing in their own city captured. It was not a miracle, people claim in Sarajevo, that theater was working and up and going at this time. It was natural and necessary for them. They were hungry, both literally and for theater going and making. Peter Brook writes that theater is a holy place in which a greater reality could be found. And this is exactly what theater meant for people during the war. It provided shelter, again, both symbolic and literal, from the constant bombardment, and it became a symbolic space. One of the ways for the citizens to preserve their dignity was to use this symbolic space as a core of resistance. So, why did Susan Sontag choose exactly this play? Because Waiting for Godot is a tragicomedy. It's a play about humans on the absolute bottom of their existence. And you know that the play has 2 acts. Well, actually, Susan Sontag has staged only the first act. And I also want to look into why she did so. There is so much hopelessness in the second act, and it's the end. So perhaps she thought that the citizens of Sarajevo were kind of enough with the first act. Nothing can be done. Ništa ne može da se uradi. I want to also see what does collective memory of this production mean for us today, 20 years after the war. It's only 20 years after the war. That also rings in my head that 20 years, it's 2 decades, and still things haven't changed in Bosnia, in fact. It may appear so from the outside, but the tension is still there. And this tension is dramatic, and this waiting is what makes it so tense. Okay. This is the city of Sarajevo. It's a panoramic view. It's just an example to see that the city is laying, surrounded with the mountains around it, because there were Olympic Games in Sarajevo in 1984, 10 years before in Lillehammer, in fact. So when Sarajevans were celebrating the anniversary of Olympic Games in the siege, Lillehammer was in the middle of it, in fact. And the next one is an example of how actually all the streets looked like during the war. And for a couple of years I have just lived behind that building there. This was my neighborhood. It looks completely different now, but this is the neighborhood of Grbavica, which was under the nationalist third side. This is like the hotel, the icon hotel. Why? The war has literally started here. People from the Serb National Party were having their meetings here, and the sniper was shooting from the top of the building, and yet this is the same hotel where Susan Sontag lived while she was staying there, and she was stealing buns and little things from the breakfast so she could actually give to her actors. Why? Her actors were exhausted. They didn't have any food to eat. There was no public transportation. They were walking for sometimes 1.5 to 2 hours to get from the places where they lived in the city to the actual place where they rehearsed. And the theater was in a complete rumble. And imagine if you have to kind of deck and go like that, and for several kilometers at the time. And it was a sniper line just here. And it has also hosted all the international body, and all the media coverage was actually done from the hotel. Kind of incredible. My mother worked in this hotel, and she quit in '94. It was too much for her. The next one is the example of one of the average-sized graveyards in Sarajevo. The picture is large. I don't know if you can see. The white tombstones are the Muslim gravestones, and the black ones are the Christian. Constantly, I keep getting the questions about, was this war, was it a religious war? Was it a national war? Why was it? Is it political? Is it a turmoil? Just the fact that people are in the cemetery together, that they are not divided there, tells you that it is not the people who wanted the division. And here is the crew. This is in front of the youth theater, and you may notice also that there are more actors than you would expect for Waiting for Godot. Susan Sontag had 2 actors for each role, and she had both female and male cast. And she said that she didn't have the heart to prevent someone from coming out on stage because everyone was so eager to work and to present their work. They really wanted to make theater. And the next one. It is kind of incredible. Susan Sontag could not understand that the actors, the friends around, everyone who knew that she was doing this, they were urging her to have this press conference, and she didn't understand why. She didn't think that she was doing a very big thing. People believed that she has the voice because first she's American. Her language is English. She's a female writer. And they believe that she has the power of sending the message outside of their country, because Bosnians felt very ignored. They felt like they were waiting in vain, inevitably just doomed. And I hope that it's a short video I wanted to show you. We'll just see how it's going to.
Much better. Then I thought, if I'm working in the theater, what play might I do? I met Haris Pasovic, who has a repertory program here, directs himself, and I proposed to him that I come back and direct a play here, and it was also obvious to me at the moment that I made this proposal to him that the play should be Beckett's Waiting for Godot. Okay, so let's go back to Nada.
Priđi, drago dijete. Priđi već jednom. Da?
Ma reci istinu. Ne.
Gdje si do sad?
Na tavani, gospođo.
Čekajte! Aha! Pomajte tamo!
Kako?
Tišina! Možda je stao.
Govori! Ne znam, gospođo.
Ostavi ga na miru, šta ti je? Šta ti je?
O, sve sama gomila laži.
Pack of lies. So, I wanted to give 3 concrete examples to also show the thematic and symbolic relationship between the play and the war in Sarajevo. It's going to be an example of siege and stage, the comparison between siege and stage and relationship between those two. Lucky as the city, the character of Lucky as the city, and the last one will be about humor and having nothing to eat. What is mutual for the city in siege and the stage? It is the limitation of the space, which poses and makes us have the feeling that we have to behave in a certain way. And here the hostage citizens perform just like the actors on stage. They're performing both for themselves and for the, I have to say, so-called spectators. And these spectators can be in different layers. These spectators can be the people who are shooting at them from the hills. These spectators can be the international community who is observing this and not doing anything to help or not engaging. And why I make this comparison? The city resembles an amphitheater because of these 5 Olympic mountains which are around it. So it's literally these people who were shooting. I still call them people. It's kind of incredible. We call them chetniks because not every Serb is a chetnik, but every chetnik was an ultranationalist who was a Serb, sadly. So they were shooting down to Sarajevo from the amphitheater. And this also makes sense when we use the military term theater of war. It was like a theater within a theater. So is waiting for Godot on stage in the play similar to waiting for the siege to end? Is it similar to waiting for the Western help? Is it waiting for this dignity to be restored? And these are some of the questions that I want to look into and explore further. What is this? What does the space and spatiality mean for us? What does this socio-historic locale mean for us in connection to this play? Another example is the personification of the city. There was one of the actors, I can't say the very skinny one because they are all kind of very skinny. He came to Susan Sontag and he said, I am playing the city. And he was playing the role of Lucky in the play. And Susan told him, she countered him and said, that's not possible. How can you be the city? And he just nodded. So later, as the work progressed, she was convinced why he said that. This is excerpt from the book. His first appearance on the stage, Lucky, carries a heavy bag, a folding stool, a picnic basket, and a greatcoat. Pozzo has a whip. This scene reminded me of Bosnian refugees, having all their belongings, their clothes, their food, all their memories packed up. They managed to pick them in very often only a few minutes. And while they were being expelled from their homes, they kind of look a little both comic and tragic. I remember during the war we wore boots and sweaters because that was all we had, and this is how we kind of went out of our homes at that very moment. So it's kind of the same with Lucky, and here comes Pozzo with a whip, and he has a rope around Lucky's neck. So, and there is a clear connection between the rope around his neck and the siege, the city, the ring in which the city was. It is a metaphor embedding an autonomy. So Lucky is the city, and the city stands for its citizens. Later, Pozzo warns that Lucky is wicked, and he sobs, "He used to be so kind, so helpful and entertaining, my good angel, and now he's killing me." So Pozzo is saying this about Lucky. It sounds as if it's a contradiction, because how can this city be a home, and how can this city mean death at the same time? It's as if the city now has a role of killing from within, which mentally could be experienced as worse than the actual killers doing this from the ring from around. It's a tricky line to follow, because war criminals like Karadzic and Milosevic claimed that this was all staged, that all these massacres were a stage, that the citizens did this to themselves just to portray themselves as victims. So why would the city kill itself? How can it kill its own citizens? What kind of wickedness is it? So the tension of waiting started to produce poison and to dull the hope during this waiting. The waiting was ongoing, and the hope was less and less. It started killing the citizens just as the rope tightening around Lucky's neck. And I have one more example. This is a monument to international community. Why did I pick this up? During the war, we depended on humanitarian aid. The citizens depended on whatever they were given from the international community. And this was one of the, it's approximately this big, of course. This is you see how small the people are, so it's a gigantic canned beef monument. Such bad quality. People, there is a story going around that people couldn't eat it, that it looked like dog food, but if they gave it to dogs, the dogs would turn gray. That's literally how bad the meat was. So, this reminded me of the moment when Estragon and Vladimir had this exchange, when Estragon was so hungry and he was looking for some food from Vladimir, and he gets a carrot in the end. Vladimir tells him he should make it last. You should make this one last, because this is the last carrot that you're going to get. You know, it's like turnip or a carrot, and like this little piece of carrot. And Estragon is meditating upon this carrot, and he's sucking on it, and he's really enjoying it. But then he says, funny, the more you eat, the worse it gets. So the more you eat this, and this is the only thing you had to eat, the worse it got for the people. Finally, Susan Sontag's visit and engagement meant so much for the citizens of Sarajevo that they have given the name of the main square in the National Theatre after her. So this is the theatre square of Susan Sontag. And I want to see, to finish up the idea for the thesis, I want to see how creativity and theater and performance were used in the business of survival in this context. What did Godot and Sarajevo mean, and what does the memory of a performance mean for us today? How can we re-enter the narrative 20 years afterwards? And we all have to do is to wait on here. Well, shall we go? Yes, let's go. But you are allowed to move, of course, because... Thank you. And of course, if you have any questions, I'm happy to hear. Feedback, critique, anything. I'm very humble. I'm at the beginning of my research. It was very brave. You don't know how it was brave.
You can say something about the several Beckett's war experiences and what that means for his.
Yes, of course. I have forgotten to mention that Marjorie Perloff has written about Beckett's war experience, which was, of course, very close for him. He was in war himself, and he was hiding with his wife, and has experienced the lack of food and the turmoil and terrible circumstances to live in. And the play was written between 48 and 49, and it took some years for it to be played afterwards. So this was immediately written just after the war has ended for him. So he apparently has this knowledge about the lack of food and the meditation upon the carrot. People couldn't relate to it at first. The play was called and interpreted in so many different ways. But then when we put it in context of war, to me it makes much more sense that Beckett was hungry and then kind of put this into his character than that it was absurd and that this play didn't mean anything for anyone. So that's why I expect that the war context and reading it from this aspect will change the way we read the play.
I don't know nothing about Susan Sontag's work in Sarajevo, but in some way I only was wondering about Godot is not coming, but Susan Sontag is coming. How do you deal with this tension? Is this a intended dialectics to escape from the absurd? In doing that, coming back.
Yeah, the action versus the.
Yeah. Because so we could in some way say is Susan Sontag the incarnation of the absent Godot?
Well, I wouldn't. I understand the question. It's a very interesting, perhaps, to go into this because Susan Sontag was very criticized for having done this at all, and not even criticized, trashed completely. So when she came there, the conclusion was that they are waiting for Clinton. So I would say that Susan Sontag is rather like the boy. She was rather like the messenger who came on stage. It kind of that occurs to me rather than the incarnation. They wanted the greater power to stop the war, and Susan Sontag could not stop the war. She was only the messenger. So they waited for that's why that was her sentence, that they were waiting for Clinton. So that was kind of past. That was a general joke when she was in Sarajevo. But yes, thank you.
How long did she stay in Sarajevo for the?
First, it was for a month that spring in April 1993, and then it was for 7 weeks, July and August 1993. And she said that it was an extremely long. It took a long time to stage this because actors were forgetting, they could not remember, they were hungry, they were exhausted, they worked under impossible circumstances. They didn't have. It was middle of the summer, so it was very, very hot and warm. And they staged the play with candles, in fact. And one morning, someone stole the candle. So imagine how these people were. Someone wanted it for their own home, and she was kind of hiding these, taken from the hotel. Everyone was managing and stored the candles. And one morning, before the premiere, the candles were gone. So yeah, they had to kind of improvise that. Same evening. So she stayed there for a short time, but such a long time it took to stage the performance.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming around. And thanks to Dina. You have some books there?
Yeah, there are some books by the coffee table if you are interested to take a look. Some of those they're not from the library, in fact. There are about testimonials from the, one of the books is called Theater in War Sarajevo. So it is testimonies from the people who worked in a theater during the war. And one of them is also called Balkan Blues, and these are the stories from the Balkans. So it's a context of telling about the context of war. But they're all touching upon performativity and theater and what the space